Hey, good to see you all. You can take the time to look at the other people here if you want. Mm, mm.
Nice to see everyone. Just a reminder that this is both, we're having the folks for the Sunday sitting and it's closing talk of our 10-day online meditation retreat. It's good to have everyone here. And next week we'll get back to the normal Sunday sitting. One of the things that I really have loved about our online courses, over the past couple of years has been the walking meditation in the mornings. Just being able to offer more instruction and kind of take the time with everyone to walk and have that experience where some folks are, have their microphones unmuted. So you're, hearing little bits of where other folks are and the shared soundscape. Something so good about the walking practice and interesting how few people come to that each morning because it's not that early in most places as it is here. I think the walking is such an important practice for this question of kind of integration of the sensitivity and responsibility, inwardly, outwardly, in terms of our practice in general, in terms of coming out of retreat back into, for most people, a little more interaction, more externally oriented lives. And I really feel that it's in the walking that we learn so much about what's possible and what the challenges are, how to face those challenges. That how powerful the seated practice is with our eyes closed and really paying attention to what we think of as the inner world and the internal experience and the receptive quality of all of the mind with the sense doors and trying to develop continuity with that and concurrence and insight and all of those beautiful things that we try to develop. And then with the walking, there's that part of what's so hard about it is that we're trying to find some way forward with the receptive, continue that receptive quality, but also understand that we're integrating and bringing in this active quality this, volitional movement and gestures and relationship in the world around us and the space around us. And that is just really hard. It's really amazing, to try to do that and to try to see, like, how do we both have this what can feel kind of like countervailing forces of that awareness and the sensitivity and the subtlety of that we're trying to observe, at the same time the active, volitional parts, physical gestures. Sometimes I think it's important to recognize how hard that is, especially, if there happens to be something happening in the heart that's more calling the attention, maybe something more poignant, more subtle, more kind of unclear, some emotion or mix of emotions. There's a way in which I can see that I have to get careful with the walking practice, because there's a way that the walking practice can override that sensitivity to what's happening. There's a way that I can kind of lose connection to something internal if I'm just even a little bit more on the kind of volitional, intentional action, overriding, pushing through, in the body, in an action. And, sometimes it may happen in the middle of a walking period where it's like you feel something happening, but it's hard to observe it and keep walking. And so sometimes it's worth trying and exploring. Sometimes it's worth just coming to standing, right? Where you're not having to do as much of that uh, outward gesturing with the activity of the mind and the invocation of more physical experience. Even sometimes standing can feel like it requires too much effort to stay standing. So we can come to sitting if we need to. And that's true just in general in the seated practice. Sometimes in our lives and our meditation lives and retreat, else other times in our lives, we start to see that even actually sitting up is taking a kind of energy, is taking a kind of enforcement of a volitional preference. Uh, and that there are things we might encounter, in our experience that make it more appropriate to lie down, you know, where we really can rest, where we really aren't needing to assert a certain posture, and the energy we have can go more into the receptive, sensitizing exploration. And so just this question of like how fast can you walk and stay mindful? Really? How do we make sure we're not moving faster than the speed of love? Are we able to keep a connected experience of care through a full lifting, moving, placing of the feet, right? Through one simple gesture? Are we really able to be sensitive to what's happening in the body, in the mind, and the sensors at a normal walking speed? It's not that it's impossible, but I think the answer is usually very humbling. Usually the answer is about encouraging us to slow down, right? To really see that actually to keep mindful, to actually be able to truly bear witness to what's happening internally, externally, to to honor that sensitivity requires moving very slowly. To be able to care for it, to bring this gentleness and tenderness of heart, actually requires moving very slowly, much of the time. It's such an important question for us in our lives. How are we walking faster than the speed of love, than the speed of care, than the capacity of our mindfulness in any given moment? What are the consequences of that? What are we losing a connection to, internally or externally? What happens when we slow down, when we have a more direct experience of what's happening? How do we respond to what's happening internally, externally in a different way? I mentioned this morning, it's sometimes it's amazing how you can just be like the way in which you can just be walking on this straight path and still get totally lost. And then the other side of that is how to remember that we can, just because we've gotten totally lost, it doesn't mean we've lost our path. It doesn't mean we've fallen off our path. It's humbling and it's reassuring. And then this question of, do we even notice much of the time in our lives where we are on our path? Are we lost? Are we not lost? In in Burma, a lot of the time, if you're departing somewhere and you say, "Oh, tuame," I'm leaving. The One of the gestures, one of the responses is "Pie pie tuava," go slowly, walk slowly. So important to internalize the value of that. Similarly to the quietude, how loud can we be and still be listening to ourselves, listening to the world around us, listening to another person. What is it to be quiet, right? Where do we see that ability to override the sensitivity through more loud, internally loud or externally loud in our response? What are we missing in that? What do we lose connection with in terms of mindfulness, in terms of care? I think I read this recently, this Antonio Machado poem, Caminante no hay camino. Wayfarer, there is no way. Really, walker, there is no path. Walker doesn't sound as poetic. Wayfarer, the way is your footprints and nothing else. Wayfarer, there is no way. The way is made by walking. Walking, you make your way. And looking back, you see the path that you will never again tread. Wayfarer, there is no way but the wake on the sea. Something about the gravity of our path and the fleetingness of it. Not a conceptual experience, right? But a concrete, direct stepping of the foot on the earth. Today in the walking meditation, it was so beautiful. The moon was still out, at that time of morning for us, just past the full moon, and it was so low in the sky. And it's something that I have been noticing, and this kind of range of the moon, and we're in one of these kind of periods of lunasis or stillness. Basically, there's like we have the solstice, the equinoxes, and the sun. That the Earth goes around the sun, and we're doing it at this little tilt, and there's a kind of predictable rhythm every year of when the sun is at its maximum northerly um, rising and setting, the maximum southerly, and then the midpoints in between those. And that solstice, that sense of right around the top of or the bottom of it, that there's a few days where it feels like it doesn't move. It seems to the eye that there's this, it lands in the same place for a few days. And that the moon also has a similar cycle, but it's a much vaster cycle. It's an 18.5-year cycle that the moon is on of its maximum highest and lowest um, rising and setting points, and of highest and lowest of, in the zenith where it gets in the middle of the sky. And so we're in this year or so in which it's going to its most northern and most southern points. And I think it's this fall that we'll see the culmination of it. And those years are, it can happen at any point of the sun's phases of the moon. But that it's often more dramatic, when it's a full moon or near the full moon, like it has been the last few days. There are years where there are more eclipses, which is beyond my total understanding, but has to do with that. And this is something when it's, that they're on, folks who study this and ancient, megaliths and ancient structures and societies, that it is something that many old civilizations are very aware of, also the lunatices and these 18.5-year cycles, which you also just it's like almost unfathomable, I think, to us in a way to be that sensitized, to understand that deeply the rhythms and cycles of the natural world around us, that we encounter, how powerful that is. How much ancient knowledge it has to accumulate over so long in order for that to become instilled, in a society, in a way of life, to the degree that you're building your cities and sacred spaces, and orientation to these things. And of course, there was a time where those mattered in a material way more than they have to most of us in our daily lives in these times, that we live, you know, the, the solstices matter in terms of planting, in terms of weather, in terms of, pests, in terms of all kinds of phenomena that humans had to be so sensitive to and responsive to, and individually and as kind of groups, as societies for so long. And for so long, we've lived in an era where humans have not felt that need to be so sensitive to those cycles, right? That through, science and technology, we can override a lot of these dependencies for some time at least. The planting crops whenever because we've modified them, or planting, like the uh, being able to control so much of the conditions around, we'll just say agriculture, but even travel, right? You think about places where you couldn't visit family, travel as much until it was frozen. The northern climes, or it's like you had to wait until the winter to actually be visiting people in long distances. So you could get on your sleds and make those journeys. You couldn't have those same experiences, or just with the oceans. When can you make journeys? When can you not make journeys? So much dependent on these currents and powerful cycles. And now it's like we can make our journeys whenever we want, you know. So there's a material reasons why we don't need to be as sensitive. It's not, our daily life is not requiring us to, our survival does not appear to be directly associated with, how far south the sun is setting, how far north the moon is setting. And I feel maybe I've talked about this a little bit too. I do feel like maybe it would be good to start reconsider the constellations, to have that be a little more. I was thinking of like the tourist, because there's like a season of tourism, greater tourism here, and like you would see it starting to rise, in like November. You'd be like, oh, the tourist season is coming, the snowbird or mango season. You're like, that's the mangoes, the lychees. People are aware of that, but we're not. Are we aware of? Are we like synchronizing it with like what's happening in the systems around us? It's hard not to believe that this has not also led to a certain degree of desensitizing to the subtleties internally, right? That like a recognition of a certain way of being or demands on our lives can override being sensitive to these internal weather systems, to these internal cycles and patterns and, ancient movements, right, of the heart, mind, body. All right, that there's something about the desensitizing externally that must have some, of course it does. Of course we lose the ability to pay attention internally. We learn how well we can repress and override and think we can get away without any consequences to that. I think in the world outside and the world inside, I think there's more and more clarity that we cannot I cannot. There are consequences, right, to not listening, to losing that sense of sensitivity that informs our responsibility, because it's so hard to do anyway, right? And if we're not even listening or not even paying attention, our actions are just based on what we want and where we think we're going and what we're getting. Mm, we, as yogis, we're aware of what those consequences are internally. We're aware of how hard it is to try to balance these things, to negotiate the inner, the outer, and sensitivity with responsibility and action. Mm, but I think, we see the natural world responding, to that lack of sensitivity and lack of responsibility. And then we see the inner worlds of so many of us responding in the same way, in our society. And we are, confronted with more and more extreme weather out there, in here. And so what is our response? You know, is it moving faster? Is it being louder? Do we fathom on some level that we need to get more sensitive? We need to slow down. We need to be quieter in order to fully fathom what's happening internally, deal with the repercussions of that, to fully listen to what's happening externally, attend to those dynamics. Not even because necessarily we know what to do or what the solution is or what impact it'll even have, but because we know it's the right way to be, it's a better way to be in ourselves, in the world. When I lived in North Carolina, there was a Burmese Sayadaw who I'd visit out towards Greensboro, and Sayadaw Unandawanta. And there was a little while where I was taking some um, Abhidhamma, Buddhist psychology classes with him and a little Pali language classes. And he was talking about Vedana, a pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feeling tone. And he was saying about how we were talking about how difficult it is to be in community. And he, he was trying to have different Sangha members of, monks and nuns from different orders and different, all Buddhists, but not from the same traditions, different countries, different cultures, gather, and develop a little bit of community. And he said it was very difficult. The people interpreted some of the rules differently and had their tensions about that. And it was to him surprisingly complex, And he said there was some incident happened with some other monastic that it irritated him, it frustrated him, and he noticed that even after this gathering had happened, when this other monk would come to mind, there was an unpleasant feeling tone in the heart, unpleasant Vedana. He just watched it, and he watched it and he watched it. And he said, it lasted 63 days. And on the 64th day, I noticed that the thought of this monk came up and there wasn't unpleasant Vedana. It was neutral. It's like, wow. I wasn't, that is a very dedicated practice. you know? He isn't saying I was meditating all day long on this thing and trying to wrestle with it. It was like just in his daily life. He was aware of this thing that this incident that had occurred, this phenomena had arisen, and that it had built some momentum. It had built a pattern. And he was interested to see what happened with it. Right. But that's a very deep, very committed process, very inspiring to me that we take that kind of thing so seriously because we see what's at stake. We see what's at stake in a perception we have of someone and how we treat them, and then how they treat us, and then how, like, are we increasing or are we decreasing animosity, strife, conflict? Are we coming to understanding? Are we listening to ourselves as we listen to the world and listen to others? These storms that come through. And I think, we are, of course, entering a time where the old cycles of so many things are disrupted in the natural world, in the human, social, political world. And we don't know, necessarily. Does it mean that there are new cycles, new rhythms, new patterns in place? Does it mean that things are just totally unpredictable? Some version of both. It's what does it require of us in terms of our hearts, in terms of our practice? Can we be more sensitive, more quiet, more interested, more humble, more careful? Not not think that it always means the same thing. It's like there's this flexibility in that approach. It's not just a hard-headedness. It is a matter of like firm principles, but flexible approach, flexible tactics. When there's a fire, you're supposed to close all your doors, close all your windows. When there's a flood, you're supposed to open your doors, open your windows. They don't they don't call for the same response. But the response of the heart, whether we're closing windows or opening them, can be the same if we're really listening, if we're really paying attention. That precariousness, is something that's come up on the retreat a little, and made me think of this sutta. Like, when when the stakes are so high, do we recognize that? Right? Do we recognize that the stakes are high? First of all, at some point, the Buddha was staying in Nyatika, in the brick house. The Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, venerable sir, they replied. Mendicants, when mindfulness of death is developed and cultivated, it's very fruitful and beneficial. It culminates in freedom from death and ends in freedom from death. But do you develop mindfulness of death? All these hands go up. One of the mendicants said, Sir, I develop mindfulness of death. How do you develop it? In this case, sir, I think, if I'd only live for another day and night, I'd focus on the Buddha's instructions and I could really achieve a lot. That's how I develop mindfulness of death. Another one says, I'd do it too. How do you do it? If I'd only live for another day, I'd focus on the Buddha's instructions and could really achieve a lot. And another, well, if I only live half a day, I'd focus on the Buddha's instructions and could really achieve a lot. And another, well, if I'd only live as long as it takes to eat a single alms meal, I'd focus on the Buddha's instructions and I could really achieve a lot. That's how I develop it. Another one, if I'd only live as long as it takes to eat half an alms meal, as long as it takes to chew and swallow 4 or 5 mouthfuls. Oh, if I'd only live as long as it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful. Finally, one says, oh, if I'd only live as long as it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, I'd focus on the Buddha's instructions and could really achieve a lot. That's how I develop mindfulness of death. So the Buddha says, all the mendicants who develop mindfulness of death by wishing to live for a day and a night, or a day, or half a day, or as long as it takes to eat a meal, or half a meal, or chew and swallow 4 or 5 mouthfuls, these are called mendicants who live negligently. They slackly develop mindfulness of death for the ending of defilements. But the mendicants who develop mindfulness of death by wishing to live as long as it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful, or to live as long as it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, these are called mendicants who live diligently. They keenly develop mindfulness of death for the ending of defilements. So you should train like this. We will live diligently. We will keenly develop mindfulness of death for the ending of defilements. That's how you should train. So this question has come up in the retreat of what, practicing mindfulness of death. And, we've offered a few different ways that some of our teachers have encouraged that. But this recognition that death could come in the next in breath, or the next out breath, or swallowing one mouthful of food, right? This idea of like, are we really living with that degree of understanding of the reality, that degree of spiritual urgency, and that degree of the precariousness? And I think, so many of us are more and more, the precariousness of the world is so evident. And our fears about that are so evident, and our longings for something else are so evident. But, there is still often this notion of like, oh, it's, oh, this next year things could go down, or the next, and that's shrunk, right, with the climate stuff. It's like, oh, we think it's 50 years away. And you're like, suddenly you're like, huh, this stuff is happening, or 5 years away, or yesterday, like this terrible thing happened. So there is a way in which I think there's more and more sense of this, like the weight of the immediacy of the precariousness. And yet we resist it, right? We agonize over it. We're terrified, and of course. And yet, how close does it have to get for us to feel like we want to practice more diligently? That we understand the urgency of this liberation, that we have so much good fortune and so much practice behind, and so much momentum. So much depends on how we receive this moment and how we respond to it, internally and externally. And should that be the cause of greater anxiety? Should that be the cause of greater running around, more screaming? Or is it the cause of getting quieter, slowing down, being more careful, listening more deeply? We do what we do, and we understand that there's a training. There's an unfolding. We are not perfect. We our hearts will tremble in the face of fear, of anxiety, of worry, of anger, frustration, sadness. And there will be times where it's more than we can bear, or we forget to bear it. We forget to feel it. And we just move faster, right? We just walk faster, talk louder. It's understandable. And yet also it's this, coming out of practice, coming into the world, coming into our lives. There's this opportunity of an unfolding of our goodness, right? A flourishing of it, a sharing of it, and a receiving of it, rooted in sensitivity, rooted in paying attention, rooted in care, carefulness. Good to do, hard to do. And so in the name of that, I thought we could do a little chanting together, because I feel like there's the walking practice, and then there is the chanting that we've been doing on the retreats, and on this past retreat, that is another, that sort of like middle place between sensitivity and expression, right? That sensitivity and the responsibility, and where is that translation from what we feel in the heart to what we say in our words? How important that is. And all of you okay. So the invitation is, we're going to chant a different sutta, and we'll do it call and response. Anyone who would like to unmute themselves is going to be able to, and welcome to, and invited to. Now, those of you who've been on retreat recently or in the past with us online, you know that it's going to sound crazy, but there's something joyful in that and wonderful in that, and that's what we're aiming for. And that we can feel the goodness of that together as we move into this next phase of our practice and our daily lives. So, anyone who would like to unmute yourselves, there's no pressure to, but the invitation is there. Feel free to unmute, and I will share this chant, and I'll say a few words about it. This is the Mangala Sutta, and it's chanted all over the place and is beautiful. We will chant mostly the second part of it. I'll read this part in English, and then we'll chant in the Pali. For 12 years, people and deities tried to understand the meaning of the word blessing, but could not discover the 38 blessings that are the cause of happiness. O good people, let us recite those blessings which destroy all evil, taught by the deity of deities, for the benefit of all beings. Thus I have heard, at one time the Blessed One was dwelling at the monastery of Anathapindika in Jeta's Grove, near the city of Savatthi. Late in the night, a deity with surpassing splendor illuminated the entire Jeta's Grove and came to the Blessed One. Drawing near, the deity respectfully paid homage to the Blessed One, stood at a suitable distance, and then addressed the Blessed One in verse. Many deities and people desiring happiness have pondered the meaning of blessings. Please tell me, what is the highest blessing? So we'll go line by line, and then I'll read them in English. Asewana cha balanam,
Asivana cha balanam,
pandita nanya cha sewana,
pandita nande cha
Nandesha
siwana,
puja cha pujanayanam,
Puja
puja
cha
cha
puja
pujanayam,
etam mangalam uttamam.
Etam Mangalam
Lamotana.
Not to associate with fools, but to associate with the wise, and to honor those who are worthy of honor. This is the highest blessing. Patirupa desawasocha.
Patirupa
Desawasa
Desawasacha
Ubecha katapunyata.
Ubecha Katanyata
Atasama panidicha.
Atasama Panadicha
Asasamadija.
Eta mangala mutamam.
Itamangalamutana.
Lamutanam
To live in a suitable place, to have performed meritorious actions in the past, and to set oneself up in the right direction. This is the highest blessing. Bahusa chancha sipancha.
Bahasucha
Chancha
Sipancha
Vinayocha susikito.
Vinayota
Yotasusito
Sisikito.
Subhasita cha yawacha.
Subhasita Yawacha
Yawacha.
Eta mangala mutamam.
Etamangalamutanam
Itamangalamutana.
To be knowledgeable, skilled in crafts, well trained in discipline, and to be well spoken. This is the highest blessing. Mata pitu upatanam.
Matapitu Upatanam.
Uttadarasa sangaho.
Puttadarasa
Utadarasa
Sangaho
Anakula cha kamanta.
Anachula Kamata
Anakulatakamata.
Eta mangala mutamam.
Etamangala
Itamangalamutana.
To look after one's parents and support one's partner and children. To have a peaceful occupation. This is the highest blessing. Danyancha dhammacharya cha.
Dhammacharya Cha
Ariyacha.
Nyatakanancha sangaho.
Nyatakandancha Sangaho
Anawajani kamani.
Anajajani
Kamani.
Kamani
Eta mangala mutamam.
Etamangalamutanam
Itamangalamutana.
To be generous, righteous in conduct, to assist one's relatives, to engage in blameless actions. This is the highest blessing. Arati vitrati papa.
Arapiripa
Majapamanacha sanyamo.
Machapanancha Sanyamo.
Apamado cha damesu.
Apamado Cha
Apamadocha
Damesu
Damesu.
Eta mangala mutamam.
Etamangalamutanam
To abstain from evil thoughts, deeds, and speech, to be restrained from intoxicants, and diligent in wholesome acts. This is the highest blessing. Garavocha niwatocha.
Garocha
Niwatocha.
Santuticha katanyuta.
Santucha Kanuta
Kalena dhammasavanam.
Alena
Wanam
Dhammasavanam.
Eta mangala mutamam.
Etamangalamutanam
To be respectful, humble, content, grateful, and listen to the Dhamma at suitable times. This is the highest blessing. Kanti cha soa chasata.
Kantisha Sovachasata.
Samananancha dasanam.
Samanancha Sasanam.
Kalena Dhamma Sakacha.
Kalena Dhamma
Sakacha.
Etamangala Mutamam.
Mangala Mutanam.
To be patient, obedient, to visit monastics, and to have timely discussions on the Dhamma. This is the highest blessing. Tapocha brahmacharyancha.
Tapocha brahmacharyancha.
Ariya Sachana Dasanam.
Ariya Sachanam.
Nibbana Sachikiriyacha.
Nibbana Sachanyacha.
Etam Mangala Mutamam.
Etam Mangala Mutanam.
To be chaste, lead the holy life, fathom the noble truths, and realize Nibbana. This is the highest blessing. Bhuttasa loka damehi.
Buddhasa loka dhammahi.
Chitam yasa nakampati.
Chitam yasa nakampati.
Asokam virajang kemam.
Asokam virajam keman.
Etam mangala mutamam.
Etam mangala mutanam.
To be confronted with the 8 worldly conditions with the mind unshaken, sorrowless, stainless, and secure. This is the highest blessing. Etadisani katwana.
Etadisani katana.
Sabatama parajita.
Sabatama parajita.
Sabata sotim gachanti.
Sabata sotim
Tam tesam mangala mutamam.
Tisam mangala mutanam.
Having fulfilled such blessings, everywhere these beings are undefeated. Everywhere they gain happiness. For them, these are the highest blessings. Mangala Suttam Nititam.
Mangala Suttam Nititam.
Here ends the discourse on the blessings. Well, thank you, everyone. I think there's something just so important about that sutta. You know, what are blessings? We look for blessings. We hope for blessings. We like to receive blessings, you know. And this question, this pondering of the devas and the humans, no one can figure out what are the blessings. And so that each of these be the highest blessings, and every single one of them are things you have to do. You know, these are like, you have to go take care of people, and you have to try to be careful in your actions and careful in your conduct and restrained in your speech. And, you know, like, these are all things that we're responsible for. And yet that it's a blessing, you know, it's beautiful, it's joyful, it's joyous. That's the way that the sensitivity is not oppressive, right? The truth of suffering, the truth of dukkha, of undependability, of unsatisfactoriness, of all of this fleetingness, and of all the storms that we know are coming, externally, internally. You know, this, where are we moving slowly enough to care at this level, to be careful at this level, to be generous at this level, to be humble at this level, to be tender, to be diligent, determined, to take each moment so profoundly, unimaginably seriously. The gravity of our responsibility of each mind moment that we encounter. And yet the beauty of that, the beauty of like this responsibility we have in each moment, and the possibility of change, the possibility of building something good and beautiful and sharing that, and that builds this goodness, this happiness internally, and it builds happiness externally. And it all just depends on this ability to listen, right? To try to understand. And then that beautiful care of moving that sensitivity into responsibility and action with ourselves, in the world around us, and the relationships, that we encounter, the natural world around us. And it's the only chance we have. And that being a force for good, of listening, of deepening sensitivity, deepening care, deepening possibility. So just with that encouragement to keep moving slowly, keep being quiet, listening. And from there, trying to find the right way forward for the next step, the next breath. Take care, everyone. Wonderful to be with you all today. And for the yogis finishing the retreat, we'll see you in about an hour for more chanting and the closing sit. And hopefully we'll see the rest of you next Sunday. Take care.